So let's take a look at the Advanced Submissions 2 job as it says in rack form. So if you're unfamiliar, you're just kind of coming in and you haven't seen these before, we can find these jobs and many, many others by looking at the load example job browser and just type in the name of the job that we want. I actually just added this job in here, so it wasn't quite there yet. So you can see here that if I load example job and just start typing advanced, we get Advanced Submissions 2, which we're looking at here. And this video may be useful to you as well, Advanced Submissions. It's pretty much the same job, but told from a slightly different lens, which may give you a secondary look at some of these techniques that we use. So I think both of these are useful in their own right. So as far as how the job works, I just want to briefly talk about some of the techniques that we use in here, because there's a couple really important ones. So the first thing I want to take a look at is the two database tables that we're using. So we have this A team and A players. And so a team is going to own players. And that relationship happens with this GUID value right here. So essentially when we create this form, we're going to create a GUID value, which we'll take a look at the code shortly in PHP. And then we write this to the database. We then have a secondary form that allows us to add players. And as part of that process, we actually use that GUID that we've captured in the first step as a related key back to the team page. So let's take a look at how that works. So if I go to team right here and look at my PHP code, you can see that I have a function called GUID. We don't really need to know what this does. The important part is that we look at the session element that we're creating called GUID. And if it doesn't exist or it's blank, we're going to go ahead and assign that to the output of this function call. And the GUID is just a global unique identifier. As you can see, it takes on the rough form of this right here. So the end result then is I have a session variable with a unique GUID assigned to it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to submit this first page through, and we're going to go to the team submission page. And the team submission page then inserts those records into the database. So it puts the name and mascot, which are these two fields right here, as well as that GUID value. Now, name and mascot are actually form fields, so we use the F token right here, whereas GUID is a session element, so we use the S token, S, of course, being for session. Now, in between these two steps, we're, of course, giving our form users the ability to add players. And the really key part to this, then, is because we've assigned GUID to a session element, this form, which is in a block right here as an iframe, has access to that GUID value. And that's how we create that relationship between the two forms. So if we actually scroll down here, we have this form. Now this is where we're actually adding players to the system. And so this is composed of two main parts: a form, where we allow users to actually put in a new player, and then an iframe in this code block right here, which shows the current roster. So essentially we're embedding this form, which is a builder form, into this page, which is a standard form page. Now, in between these two steps, or I should say connecting these two steps, is submit player. Now, submit player is going to submit to this page right here, and this does essentially two things. The first is it writes into the A players table. Notice that we're writing that team GUID value, and that comes from the session variable that we defined on the first page of the form. And then two form field elements, once again identifiable by the F tokens for player name and player position. So in other words, these two guys right here. Then we're going to issue a redirect back to page2.php. So you can basically think of this, which is page2.php, as a cycle. So we load this form, we hit submit, we cycle back to this page. Because this page includes this iframe, and because the iframe will be reloaded when our page is, when I hit submit right here, we're simply going to use this table right here to pull out the list of players from our table, where our session GUID is once again equal to the value that we've saved on the first step, and we're going to display that roster updating in real time in this loop right here. And this is a very, very common design pattern. We have a form page that contains an iframe of some other page, typically a builder page, and then when we submit that page, we insert into a database and redirect back to itself. Therefore, we create this nice tight loop here where we always have a list of the current players, and we can have our users very quickly and easily add new records that affect this table. Now, when this all runs, it looks a little something like this. We have our team right here, so we can put in something like the Brewers. And I know it's not a hot dog, but I'm just going to put hot dog anyway. Then we have our players, and so we could start to put in player names. So we can select the pitcher, add that user. Notice now that we've updated this guy in real time. This is the loop I was talking about. We hit submit, and we redirect back to this page. So everything's just kind of operating a loop. We can add a second player, and notice I'll hit submit again, and our iframe creates that new content. And we can just basically keep adding players like this here until we've filled up our current roster. Now, there are a few extra items that we usually want to be aware of. So for example, right here, right now, we want to make sure that our bucket resizes properly. We're going to cover that in an external video. But for right now, everything looks pretty good. And when we're ready to submit this form through, then I'm just going to hit submit. And then we go to our team submission page. So essentially then, if I look at this, I should have a new record of players that I just added. And this GUID value right here, notice it ends in 23FA, should match the newest record here, which it does. 23FA, it's the Brewers, the mascot of the hot dog, and then here are all the players that relate to that particular team. If you're curious to try this job on your own, we have the SQL for this job located on the last page. You'd simply take the code as it sits in this box, and you'd actually copy and paste that into your SQL editor of choice, run the job, and it'll actually create those tables for you. And yeah, feel free to kind of play around and experiment with the different ways that we're integrating this data into this particular job.